Happy Labor Day, everybody. I want to play for you a bunch of clips from one of the most bonkers, insane Trump interviews we've covered in a very long time. And I know that phrase is sort of thrown around, often for good reason, but this is something else. So you may have seen some of these clips elsewhere. I've seen it covered widely, but bear with me through this because we watched the full interview and there's just so much more than you could even imagine to this thing. And we're going to take our time going through it because I have a lot to rant about with this. So Life, Liberty, and Levin, we've covered Mark Levin's show before on Fox News. That's who Trump's sitting down with. A bizarre guy. So that by itself is going to add an extra little strange variable. But Trump, and this is the part you probably have heard reported on, seemingly incriminated himself or made the most crazy admission you could possibly imagine in an interview.
Whoever heard you get indicted for interfering with a presidential election where you have every right to do it? You get indicted and your poll numbers go up. When people get indicted, your poll numbers go down.
Whoever heard you get indicted for interfering with a presidential election where you have every right to do it? Just confirming, I was interfering, I was just allowed to. And this is why I think if you dive deeply enough into Trump's brain, his argument as to why he shouldn't be imprisoned or shouldn't be found guilty when it comes to the election interference case is premised on the idea that he has immunity. I don't think even he, if he really sits down and thinks about it, believes he didn't do the things he's being accused of. I think as he tried to argue and successfully argued, unfortunately, in front of the Supreme Court, he thinks he's just immune because he was president. He doesn't believe the concept that no one's above the law. Then you have this moment.
Now this is the United States. When it came to Hillary, you remember they subpoenaed her stuff and she bleach pit. That's where it's basically acid. Now this is.
And Mehdi Hassan responded to this. What's worse, that he moronically says an email deletion program is an acid because the name oh gosh, because the name sounds acidic, or that he keeps saying it years after he's been publicly and repeatedly corrected on it. His brain is broken. My question with something like this is, do you think he thinks that he's actually referring to acid, or is too stubborn to admit that he's been wrong for this long when he does get corrected? I have no idea. We are in the home stretch to 1 million subscribers. If you want to support in the effort to get us there, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button if you haven't already to continue getting the word out. Thank you so much. Back to the video.
Luckily, he was taken out quickly, but I'll tell you, if he wasn't, it would have been like in Las Vegas, that horrible attack in Las Vegas with the crazy man up in the building shooting down into the crowds. And that's what you would have had here. These crowds were bigger.
I understand the charitable interpretation of that is to say his crowds were bigger is what he's asserting at the Butler shooting. And so the Las Vegas shooting, the damage that was done because the shooter wasn't stopped for so long would have been exacerbated because there were more people to go after. But with his obsession with crowd sizes, does it not strike you as just so bizarre that he's talking about how if the Butler shooter, his attempted assassin, weren't stopped as quickly as he was, then it would have been disastrous, something like Las Vegas. And then he quickly goes, but my crowds were bigger. It just, does not feel right at all. Then he's asked, all right, Donald, how do you make decisions? What's your process of contemplation, of consideration? How do you make decisions that you know to be true? The American people want to know. And Trump goes, don't even worry about it. I make them very quickly with very little knowledge and very little thought. That's essentially what he says here.
Figure this out. The American people, I think a lot of them want to know, how do you come by your decisions and how do you manage in the Oval Office?
Well, I think that I learned, like I talked about the truckers, I learned about trucks, and by talking to them, in 5 minutes I knew as much as I'm going to have to know to make decisions that are going to be earth-shattering for transportation, for moving cargo and moving a lot of other things. I learned from having interaction. Some politicians don't have interaction. Some politicians aren't smart. They can't have interactions.
Can we agree, by the way, Mark Levin's face is funny there. His brain's falling apart, crumbling, collapsing, imploding. That's not, if you had the slightest bit of sense, you would not answer a question about your consideration process, decision-making process, with an answer that so clearly indicates the point you're trying to make is that you don't take much time to understand subjects. He says, I learned about trucks by talking to them. Just set aside, he was referring to truckers, but okay. Talking to them. In 5 minutes, I knew as much as I'm going to know to make decisions that are going to be earth-shattering for transportation, for moving cargo, and moving a lot of other things. The American people don't want to know, or I guess we want to know, but we're disturbed to know that as president, you believe it takes just about 5 minutes to understand a subject before making earth-shattering decisions on that subject. Then we get to the discussion of Trump's faith. And I understand the issue at hand here does relate to the attempted horrific assassination attempt against Trump. That's a very serious subject. And also, there's this reoccurring theme with Trump where he seems noticeably uncomfortable discussing his faith or lack thereof.
You've been a man of faith. You go to church. You believe in God. Has this further your belief, your commitment, and obviously God, in addition to that chart, saved your life. He has a purpose for you. Do you think about these things?
Well, I think you believe more because when you speak to experts, like my sons who are shooting experts, but when you speak to experts, they said there was no chance that he could have missed from that distance. I think he was hurried. I think he was rushed because people were starting to say, like, you know, there's a guy up there with a gun.
Right. And then he continues on that thought here.
During a speech, I just said, put out the chart. And I, boom, turned around. If I didn't turn around, if I turned around just a little bit less or a little bit more, if I turned around more or less, it was still the end. So it's God. I know people that have become believers in God because of it, but I rarely use the chart.
Yeah. Again, because of the underlying topic's seriousness, I don't want to make light of it. But when Levin says you have been a man of faith, you go to church, you believe in God, has this furthered your belief or commitment, I saw a lot of people just quoting the you've been a man of faith, you go to church, you believe in God with LOL or because really, Mark, no, there's no record of him being a man of faith at all, going to church at all until he was running for political office. I still don't know if he really goes to church. I don't think he does, even for show. Then the normal garbage here.
We have people that are allowed to just walk in from countries unknown, from countries that nobody's ever even heard of, from countries where we don't even know how to speak their language, because small countries, there are a lot of them, many more countries than people think. Nobody in this country even knows how to speak the language, and yet those children are occupying now seats in our schools, taking them away from our citizens.
We're getting real close there to the Great Replacement Theory type language. Remember, none of this, just don't allow the framing of this conversation to be set by Trump. That's my big request. He does this to try to get people started talking as if we're just going to assume it's acceptable to speak about this subject in the ways that he does. We can have, as I've gone over billions of times now, it feels like, on the show, reasonable, level-headed conversations about whatever it is, the immigration system, our border, Trump block solutions when it comes to those things. But wherever you land in that discussion, within reason, this is not on that spectrum of reasonable conversations, right? This is way off in crazy, I'm just trying to scare the ever-loving you-know-what out of my followers by saying whatever garbage and nonsense, and they're coming from jails, they're coming from these jobs, and it's so transparent. Then he says this about Mike Pence, and get ready. He dares to say what you're about to hear about Mike Pence, who you may remember there's a little history between him and Pence. It's not so great.
Things are happening that are so crazy. I think there's no human being that was ever treated worse in Congress than Justice Kavanaugh.
And Harris led the battle.
That's right. Oh, she was vicious. Oh, she was the most vicious. She was going after them, just like with Mike Pence, where she said, "You're interrupting me. I want to talk." And that's why, look, ABC is probably the worst in terms of fairness. George Flopadopoulos, the people they have there are just terrible.
Why does he keep changing the name? It was Slopadopoulos, now it's Flopadopoulos. I think he might be forgetting his own names.
Jonathan Karl. But that's the only one she'll go to. Now the other one is the head of ABC is her best friend and her husband's best.
It's interesting. It just does not exude confidence and strength to spend the weeks leading up to a debate talking about how unfair the moderation's going to be, how terribly you're going to be treated, and how I shouldn't really even have to do this debate. It's so awful, and Biden should be up there, and he was treated so terribly by his party, and they forced him out. And, I spent $100 million against Biden. You can't do that. That's stealing the election from Biden, and technically sort of me too, because I really wanted to run against him, and the network's going to be so unfair, and if it goes poorly, it's not my fault. It's because the network is so unfair. That's not the strong alpha energy that MAGA pretends to believe Trump exudes, is it? But one more Mike Pence moment, then we'll talk about how absurd this is.
But I agreed to all these things that I normally wouldn't agree to. Now they have Kamala, who they say has many deficiencies, but she's a nasty person. The way she treated Mike Pence was horrible. The way she treats people is horrible. But the way she treated Justice Kavanaugh during that hearing, in the history of Congress, nobody's been treated that way.
So y'all know we got to be accurate. We got to be accurate about these things. And I saw a lot of people responding to him saying that, thinking he was getting confused. What, Kamala treated Mike Pence poorly? What are you talking about? As another brain fill? I don't think that's what this is. I think he's referencing, because he's talking about his debate with Kamala Harris, he's referencing Mike Pence's debate with Kamala Harris, saying she treated him so poorly. And what he means is when Mike Pence would interrupt, sometimes Kamala Harris would say, "Whoa, I'm speaking, I'm going to keep talking." That's what Trump means. Because in Trump world, when he, or I guess Mike Pence, or someone who's representing him back then, interrupts you, you have to just stop talking. That's how it goes. Now, what's crazy is to say that Kamala Harris was so nasty, the term he just loves with certain people to use. When he says that interrupting's terrible, he either is purposely abusing irony or is so clueless that he famously interrupted Biden more than probably any other presidential candidate ever in a presidential debate during the 2020 debates. Obviously, then the mics were turned off for that reason. The latest go round, so it wasn't that. But in 2020, interruption after interruption, and Chris Wallace had to keep saying, Mr. President, please stop." So the fact that interruptions to him so nasty when it's Kamala Harris, but not him. Here's more.
We have the enemy outside, which would be the very standard countries, and we have the enemy from within. We have some very sick people from within.
There's some sick people.
I think that the people that go around indicting their political opponent, especially when their political opponent didn't want to do it to them, I could have done it so easy.
He's insane. I could have done it so easily. We'll get back to, because he follows up on that, his grace, as he defines it, in not going after Hillary Clinton more, even though he wanted to, and he just got pushed back. But I do want to say, Mark Levin, what are you doing? What are you doing, Mark? Look at this. He's so proud. When I don't know if he has children, but let's say when his son gets a touchdown in it's not Little League when it's football, is it? In a young people football game, football match, he doesn't look this proud. He only looked this proud when he's hearing Trump go on and on about how people in our country are more sick than anyone else. And it's a phrase that there are enemies within that are worse than the enemies abroad sort of talking point that plays into a broader set of phrases Trump used a lot. And there's quite a picture, as we've talked a lot about, that is a part of the MAGA identity now, which is believing some of the worst things you can as the formerly patriotic movement, now hating so much of your own country, hating so much of what it means to be a patriot, admiring the diametrically opposed values in countries like authoritarian governments instead of admiring aligned values in allied governments. It's all very strange. Quite the change in that movement. Then you have this.
I had to make a decision. Do I want to do this? Do I want to put the wife of the President of the United States and Secretary of State, by the way, do I want to put her in prison? And I'm trying to unify a country that really was broken badly. If you look at, what was going on with Obama when I took this over, this country had tremendous hatred, anxiety, a lot of hatred. And do I want to put the wife of a president of the United States in prison? I didn't want to do that. And then when I get out, it's like...
This is so crazy to me. First of all, can we just all agree? Because otherwise it's going to cause a whole thing. Let's just set aside for today him pretending that the country was divided maybe because of Obama and he came in as the unifier. We can't even deal with that today. We don't have the time. But that's crazy. You were causing that, but okay. Him saying over and over again that he chose not to because he was so gracious. He chose not to indict Hillary Clinton. First of all, that's not a thing you have the power to do, or at least you shouldn't. The purpose of the DOJ acting very independently from the president is so that a president can't come in and inflict their will onto, in this case, political opponents without reason. So that is a flaw in his thinking. It's why MAGA doesn't understand that Biden didn't involve himself, because they're thinking, surely Trump getting in legal trouble means Biden had something to do with it. He didn't. But Trump then says the reason he didn't indict Hillary Clinton, even though he was constantly trying to get his attorney general to, he was trying to get her put into jail, he just failed. He says, I didn't do it because she was the wife of a president. What does that mean? No, if she were guilty of crimes, then she should have been imprisoned. She wasn't, so she wasn't, right? And same things applied to you. Side note, why do you always refer to her as the wife of a president? It's because he thinks presidents should have unique status above the law, so their family should too. It's crazy in one sense how much he says, and it's weird that he would identify her just by the fact that she's the wife of a president. This time he threw in one Secretary of State, but a lot of times he just says, I can't go after the wife of a president. First of all, the law should go after them if they do anything wrong, obviously. Second of all, she was a lot more than that too. Okay. He said this as well.
And China paid me hundreds of billions of dollars, and then they say, oh, you're soft in China. I remember President Xi said, if you're soft on me, I'd hate to see if you were bad. And by the way, Putin said the exact same thing. If you're soft, I'd hate to see you bad. This is a good thing. The press, if I said, get along with him great, the press would say, oh, he said he gets along with him great. No, this is a good thing. This is a smart thing.
Mark Levin just silently admiring, just so grateful to be in the room with Trump. Yeah, China didn't pay him billions of dollars. He's talking about tariffs that U.S. companies paid. He can't get his mind around that. I told y'all we're going to take our time, all right? Sometimes we got to do so you can get a better sense. Because this is what happens. In our short attention span culture, you'll see a couple main clips, which is great, important to talk about the big ones. But then sometimes we then I don't think properly portray for you all just how crazy some of these interviews are. And if you bear through the whole thing, just how unhinged he comes off. And so that's what we're doing here. We're really taking time today to give you a sense of here's what a full Trump interview feels like. You're not going to actually watch the full thing because that would take way too long. But in terms of how many clips I'm showing you, that's what I'm trying to portray. He then said this.
But no, I think you think like.
I think you think like. All right.
No, I think you think like. If you believed in God, you believe in God more. And somebody said like, why? And I'd like to think that God thinks that I'm going to straighten out our country. Our country is so sick and it's so broken. Our country is just broken. And maybe that was the reason. I don't know.
We've gone from greatest country in the world to sick. Just sick is what right-wingers say about the country. And I'm going to have to skip over a couple of these. This is too much. This is too much. He doesn't like the word progressive, apparently, or using it.
With them because they're Trump haters at the highest level, and CNN is a Trump hater. Basically, they're liberals. I don't like to use the word progressive. It's too pretty a word. It's such a pretty word. They're progressive. Progressive means you think into the future. They're actually thinking to 3,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. These people, they're not progressive, but they're liberal.
He's a mess. Oh, I don't like using the word progressive because that's thinking about the future. We're the ones thinking about the future, not them. They want to go back. We, the Make America Great Again, back there. We're the ones. We the ones who want you to have less federal rights than you had, going back 50 years. We're the progressive ones because we want the future to be like the past. Forward, back to the future. Oh my gosh, there it is. And here's more of his confusion about tariffs.
It's not a tax on the middle class. It's a tax on another country. If you look at
another country, it's not a tax on the middle class.
It's not a tax on the middle class. It's a tax on another country. If you look at McKinley, who was actually a great president, he made the country rich. It's probably the richest we ever were, relatively. But he taxed countries for coming in and taking our jobs, for bringing us their product, for taking away our factories because they would make it and come in. And he taxed them. It was called a tariff. And it's not a tax on people.
I think we would be confused at his confusion if he didn't just admit that he spends 5 minutes to understand subjects before making earth-shattering, I think was the term, earth-shattering decisions on that subject. If you take 5 minutes to understand tariffs, you should still understand we don't have the power to tax. Does he think we're just saying, China, you're going to hand us money every time you want to sell product? But maybe that's the knowledge you get with 5 minutes of learning about tariffs. Actually, I think the first thing you would learn about tariffs is that it's not that you're taxing U.S. companies, but maybe a Trump 5 minutes is that. I will leave it there. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. And if you want to get the members-only show where we really do have so much more fun. I already don't have a tie on, but imagine if I had a tie on. The bonus show is sort of where I take the tie off, okay? And you want to be there, click the join button below. And if you want to donate to Kamala Harris's campaign, you can do that by clicking the link in the description of this video.